Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Let me take you back to 1985 when I was trying to survive high school in a town so small that your business was everyone's business. I wasn't popular, but I minded my own business and tried to keep my head down. There was this guy, one grade above me. I'll call him Tobacco Boy. He was your typical small-town troublemaker with his pack of followers who thought they were hot stuff because they chewed tobacco and acted tough. Tobacco Boy decided I was an easy target. I grew up in this town where my family didn't have much. My dad worked at the local factory, and my mom cleaned houses to make ends meet. I was smart enough, but not exceptional, just trying to get through school so I could escape to somewhere bigger, somewhere with opportunities. High school was tough enough without Tobacco Boy making it worse, but he enjoyed finding new ways to humiliate me. The worst incident happened during chemistry class. I was focused on taking notes when I felt something wet hit my back. At first I thought someone had spilled water, but the smell quickly told me otherwise. I let out a surprised exclamation as I realized what had happened. I turned around to see Tobacco Boy and his friends snickering. He had used my backpack, which was hanging off the back of my chair, as his spit cup for his chewing tobacco. Brown spit was dripping all over my books and papers. Tobacco Boy mockingly told me he thought my backpack was the trash. His friends laughed while the teacher, who always seemed to miss these moments, asked what was going on. I told the teacher that Tobacco Boy had spit his tobacco juice in my backpack. The teacher said he hadn't seen anything and told us both to settle down. My face burned with humiliation and rage. I wanted to punch him right in his smug face, but his gang of followers made that impossible. He was always surrounded by at least 3 other guys who were just as mean as he was. I cleaned out my backpack as best I could, but the stains and smell lingered for weeks. I spent the next few days avoiding him in the hallways and keeping my backpack on my lap during classes. I was seething but powerless, or so I thought. About a month later, I was in the library trying to study when I overheard Tobacco Boy at a nearby table bragging loudly to his friends. Tobacco Boy was telling his friends how easy it was to reach into his post office box and feel around the sides to steal mail. He boasted that he had gotten an elderly person's social security check the previous week. His friend asked what he had done with the check. Tobacco Boy said he had cashed it, and the clerk at the convenience store hadn't even looked twice. He told them he bought a whole case of Coors beer with the money. They all laughed. I sat there, blood boiling, as I listened to him brag about stealing from an elderly person. What Tobacco Boy didn't know was that my best friend's mother worked at our town's post office. She was a kind woman who had always treated me like one of her own kids. That afternoon I went straight to their house. I nervously told Mrs. P that I needed to tell her something, but was worried about what might happen. Mrs. P assured me that I could tell her anything. I told her what I'd overheard, including the details about how he was reaching into adjacent post office boxes. Mrs. P thanked me for telling her and said that mail theft was a federal crime. She promised to keep an eye out without mentioning my name. I almost forgot about it until 2 weeks later when the news spread through our small town. Tobacco Boy had been caught. The postal worker inside had seen his arm reaching into adjoining boxes and grabbed his wrist, bending it at a painful angle until the police arrived. It turned out this wasn't his first theft. The FBI got involved since mail theft is a federal crime. They found the evidence of multiple thefts, including the cashed social security check that matched his fingerprints. Tobacco Boy didn't finish high school. Instead, he spent the next several years in prison. The investigation also caught some of his friends who had either helped or knowingly spent the stolen money. As graduation approached, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had already been accepted to a college 3 states away, and I couldn't wait to leave this town behind. But before I left, I made sure everyone knew exactly who had tipped off the post office. I made a pointed comment to several people that Tobacco Boy should have picked a different backpack to spit in. I graduated, packed my bags, and never looked back. My son is everything to me. He's been a water baby. lived in our community pool since he could walk. Swimming became his passion, and I supported him every step of the way. Those 5 a.m. practices, the weekends spent at mates instead of birthday parties, the countless dollars spent on equipment, it was all worth it to see his face light up when he hit the water. For months, he'd been training for this practice race. It wasn't even a competition that counted for rankings or anything, just a chance for the kids to test their skills in a race-like environment. He was nervous but excited that morning, checking his goggles a dozen times and stretching like the Olympic athletes he admired. I asked him if he was ready as we pulled into the aquatic center parking lot. He responded that he was born ready, flashing that smile of his. We got there early so he could warm up properly. Everything was going according to plan until I had to use the restroom. I told him I'd be right back and suggested he keep warming up while I was gone. He nodded and adjusted his swim cap. That 5-minute bathroom break changed everything. When I returned, I knew something was wrong. There was a commotion by the pool. People clustered at one end, raised voices, and the sharp whistle of officials. My heart dropped when I didn't see my son among the other swimmers lining up. As I pushed through the crowd, I saw him, soaking wet, shivering despite the warm air, with a terrified look I'd never seen before. Officials were pulling him from the water while a woman was being held by several parents. Later, my son told me exactly what happened. The woman had called out to him, demanding he come over to her. My son approached and asked if he could help her. She then told him to get out of her son's way because her son needed to win the race. My confused son explained it was just practice, but she became angry. She said how important this was for her son's future and insisted he needed to win no matter what. When my son asked what that had to do with him, she said everything, explaining that if her son didn't win, it would reflect poorly on her family. She said he'd better get out of her son's way or she'd make him do it. When my son asked how she planned to do that, she smiled and said he'd regret ever standing in her son's way. That's when she pushed my 12-year-old son into the pool. But it wasn't just a push. She stood at the edge and repeatedly kicked his hands away every time he tried to climb out. According to witnesses, she was smiling while doing it, telling him he needed to learn his place. When I saw what was happening, something took over. The officials were already pulling my son out, wrapping him in towels, but I couldn't contain my rage. I screamed that she would pay for this, using some choice words to describe her. I shouted for someone to call the police. My son was trembling, not just from the cold water, but from fear. He whispered through chattering teeth about how the woman had told him he couldn't race and that he had to let her son win. The lifeguards checked him over while we waited for medical help. He hadn't swallowed much water, but the damage was done. As a mother, seeing that fear in your child's eyes is something you never forget. The woman, who everyone called Karen, stood there with her arms crossed. She claimed my son was going to cheat, saying she had seen him checking out the lanes earlier and planning something. Her own son stood several feet away from her, clearly wishing he could disappear. The police arrived within minutes. They talked to several witnesses, all of whom confirmed what happened. Karen kept saying she was protecting her son's interests, arguing that a mother has to do what's necessary to ensure her child's success. One officer asked if that included attacking another child. Karen was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. I pressed charges right away: assault on a minor, reckless endangerment, the works. She was taken into custody pending trial. The swim committee met that very afternoon and banned her son from all future competitions. Their statement cited his connection with a dangerous individual as the reason, though everyone knew the poor kid was as much a victim of his mother's madness as my son was. My son didn't swim competitively for months after that. The trauma of being attacked by an adult, someone who should have been there to ensure kids' safety, was too much. We started therapy, and slowly, he's getting his confidence back in the water. As for Karen, she pled guilty to reduced charges but still served jail time. Her husband filed for divorce shortly after, unable to deal with the shame and legal bills her actions brought upon their family. Sometimes I wonder what drives a person to such extremes. What kind of thinking makes you think harming a child is acceptable in the pursuit of your own child's success? What I do know is this: my son is swimming again, And every time he dives into that pool, it's a victory over fear, over entitlement, over everything that woman stood for. I wasn't proud of my behavior in 6th grade. Looking back, I was a real pain in the butt to my teacher. It was her first year teaching at our Catholic school, and instead of making it easier for her, I made it as difficult as possible. Every day I found new ways to push her buttons. I'd talk during lessons, pass notes, make stupid jokes, and encourage others to join in. I questioned her teaching methods, pretend I didn't understand simple instructions, and forget to do my homework. I was testing her limits constantly, seeing how far I could go before she'd snap. She rarely did. She'd give me stern looks, keep me after class sometimes, or make me write sentences during recess. But she never lost her cool with me, which I took as an invitation to push harder. When the last day of school came, everyone was in a good mood. We'd finished our final exams the day before, and today was just about cleaning out desks, signing yearbooks, and saying goodbyes. Our teacher had even brought in cupcakes and juice for a small party. But I decided that wasn't enough excitement. I'd smuggled a water pistol into my backpack that morning, thinking it would be funny to cause some chaos on our final day. When our teacher turned to write something on the chalkboard, I pulled out my water gun and took aim. I whispered to the kid next to me to watch what I was about to do, and then, ere I squeezed the trigger, a stream of water hit our teacher right on the back of her white blouse. She froze mid-sentence, her chalk still pressed against the board. The classroom went silent. When she turned around, I knew I'd made a mistake. Her normally kind face had changed completely. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened, and her cheeks flushed red. I realized I'd finally found her breaking point. She walked directly to my desk, and I tried to hide the water gun under my notebook, but it was too late. She'd seen it. Without saying a word, she grabbed me by the back of my neck, not painfully but firmly enough that I couldn't escape. She hissed at me to come with her, her voice quiet but cold. I felt a chill run down my spine. She walked me out of the classroom, her hand still gripping my neck. The other students watched in silence as she led me into the hallway. My stomach dropped as I realized where we might be headed. The principal's office. Our principal was an elderly nun who we all called the goose behind her back. She was known for her strict discipline and had been rumored to use a ruler on troublemakers' knuckles. As we walked down the corridor, I started preparing myself for the lecture and punishment that awaited me. But to my surprise, we walked right past the principal's office. Instead, my teacher steered me toward the drinking fountain at the end of the hall. Before I could process what was happening, she bent me forward and positioned my head over the fountain. With one hand still on my neck, she used the other to press the button on the fountain. Cold water gushed up, soaking my hair and face. She held me there for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 10 seconds. Water ran down my neck and soaked the collar of my uniform shirt. When she finally released the button, I gasped for air, water dripping from my nose and chin. She told me that now we were even before grabbing me by the neck again and walking me back to the classroom. I was completely wet, water still dripping from my hair and running down my face. When we entered the room, every student turned to look at me. There was a moment of silence, and then everyone burst out laughing. I sputtered out that this wasn't fair. Water still dripping from my chin. She asked if it wasn't fair, pointing out that I thought it was funny to get her wet on the last day of school, and she thought it would be equally funny to return the favor. My classmates were still laughing, pointing at my soaked head and the wet patch on my shirt. I wanted to be angry, to complain that a teacher shouldn't be allowed to do something like that. But deep down, I knew I deserved it. I'd been tormenting this poor woman all year, and she'd finally given me a taste of my own medicine. I spent the rest of the day sitting in my wet clothes, my hair slowly drying into a mess. When the final bell rang, I didn't rush out like the other kids. Instead, I hung back and waited until everyone had left. I quietly said sorry for being a jerk all year, my voice barely audible as I couldn't meet her eyes. She told me she knew and said sorry if she went too far that day. She added that teaching isn't always easy, especially when students test boundaries. I told her that I wouldn't do it again. She said she knew I wouldn't, describing me as a good kid who sometimes makes poor choices, adding that we all do that sometimes. I nodded and looked up at her. She wasn't angry anymore. She looked a little sad. She wished me a good summer and said she hoped 7th grade would be a better year for me. My partner and I had been living in the downstairs unit of a duplex for about 3 years. We loved the place because it came with exclusive use of the yard. It was even written into our lease agreement that we had both use and care responsibilities for the outdoor space. This was standard for these types of duplexes in our area. Upstairs, tenants typically didn't get yard access in their lease. We're not unreasonable people. The previous upstairs tenants were lovely, and we happily shared our outdoor furniture, fire pit, and other yard amenities with them. We had a great system going until she moved in. It was late fall when our new upstairs neighbor arrived. At first, everything seemed normal. We continued using our yard through winter like we always did, having small bonfires in our fire pit, completely legal in our area, and enjoying our space. Then spring came around, and that's when things started going downhill. One day, I was coming home from work when I overheard her loudly talking on the phone outside. She was complaining that we wouldn't let her use the yard and that her kid kept asking to play outside, but we kept telling him no. She made it sound like we were being completely unreasonable. I was shocked. First of all, we had never once spoken to her child about the yard or anything else. Second, she had never approached us about using the yard. And third, I would never tell a kid they couldn't play outside. I contacted our property manager to clear things up. The manager suggested several compromises, including splitting the yard between us, giving her the front yard while we kept the back, or giving her the front, left side, and 70% of the backyard, leaving us just a small walkway from our door to the right side. But every suggestion was met with the same response from her, a big fat no. She wanted it all specifically. She wanted all our stuff. When she was told she couldn't use our fire pit, she threw a fit, but eventually got her own. Then came the scary part. One night when we weren't home, she had a bonfire that reached over 6 feet high, just 5 feet from the building. Our doorbell camera later showed her and her friends joking about how the fire was about to get out of control and how they had no water to stop it if things got out of hand. They were laughing about potentially burning down our home with our dogs inside. Thankfully, we weren't home that night, and the fire didn't spread to the building. The harassment became daily after that. The stomping upstairs got so bad that she actually broke a window in our unit. My dog started ripping his fur out from stress. We later found out she was bouncing a basketball inside her apartment at all hours. We eventually had to move our dogs out for their safety. That's when I decided on my revenge. One weekend, while she was away, we removed everything we owned from the yard. The fire pit, patio chairs, tables, firewood, horseshoe pits. We even took the decorative rocks. We gave most of it to our next-door neighbor, who was happy to receive it. Then I called the property manager. I told her that the problematic tenant could now have exclusive use of the yard. The property manager seemed relieved and asked when we would be providing the neighbor with access to our lawnmower. I laughed and told her that we wouldn't be letting her use our mower, and even if we did, she probably wouldn't do the yard work anyway. I made it clear that if we couldn't use the yard without being harassed, she might as well have it, but the maintenance would be the property manager's problem now. The property manager understood the situation and hired a landscaping service because, as expected, the upstairs neighbor had no intention of maintaining the yard herself. Our doorbell camera recorded her using the backyard exactly once after we removed everything. She just dragged her baby in circles around the house, looked around at the empty yard, realized all our stuff was gone, and walked back inside. She never used the yard again. It turned out she didn't want the yard at all. She wanted our stuff in the yard. And when she couldn't have it, she had no interest in the space. We eventually moved out when our lease ended, but I heard from the next-door neighbor that the property manager started enforcing the original lease terms again. The upstairs neighbor moved out shortly after we did, complaining that the place wasn't as advertised because she didn't get exclusive use of a fully furnished yard. Some people just can't stand to see others enjoying something they don't have, even when they have no real use for it themselves. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.